England, early May 1944, 8th Air Force, 56th Fighter Group, RAF Boxted. The dawn mist lifted from the wet grass like steam from a boiler. The smell of oil and damp earth mixed in the cold air, thick and metallic. Oil smoke drifted across the line of P-47 Thunderbolts parked beneath the dull English sky, their olive-drab skins glistening with dew. Ground crews in heavy wool jackets moved like ghosts between the hulking aircraft, wiping moisture from gun ports, checking hydraulic lines, and feeding belts of .50 caliber ammunition, 425 rounds per gun, 8 guns in all, into each wing root with careful, practiced hands. The sound of metal links clinking into the feed trays echoed faintly through the chill morning. Lieutenant Jack "Hawk" McCallister stood a few yards away from his aircraft, arms folded, watching every move. His Thunderbolt, a P-47D-22 RE, serial 42-26298, bore the name Betsy's Thunder, painted in red cursive beneath the engine cowl, a tribute to a girl back home in Kansas he hadn't seen since 1942. The big machine was unlike anything he'd ever flown. It was broad-shouldered, brutal in shape, all muscle and noise. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800-59 Double Wasp, with its 18 cylinders arranged in twin rows, loomed before him like a beating heart of steel. He placed his hand on the metal skin, still cool from the night air. The surface trembled faintly as a nearby engine came to life. "She's not pretty," he muttered to himself, "but she's mean." One of the British armorers glanced up from a munitions cart, smirking. "Looks more like a flying barrel than a fighter, sir." Jack chuckled. "You wouldn't say that if you'd seen what she can do." He'd heard far worse. The Germans had made it a point to mock the Thunderbolt in their broadcasts, calling it der fliegende Milchkuh, the flying milk cow, heavy, clumsy, unfit for a dogfight. They joked that American pilots needed ladders to climb aboard. But the truth, Jack knew, was far less funny when you were staring down 8 synchronized Browning M2s, each spitting fire at 850 rounds a minute. Over the loudspeaker came the sharp crackle of a radio transmission. *** red flight, scramble, bogies over the channel. Possible Ju-88s at 15,000 feet, ***. The airfield erupted into movement. Mechanics jumped clear, crews sprinted to the sides, and the deep-throated roar of engines igniting one after another filled the damp morning. Jack climbed up the wing, slid into the cockpit, and began his checklist with practiced calm. Fuel pressure, mixture rich, supercharger auto, cowl flaps open. He glanced at the photo taped beside the gun sight, Betsy, smiling in a sundress, then pulled his oxygen mask over his face and flipped the magneto switches. The propeller blurred to life with a cough and a snarl. The whole plane shuddered as the cylinders caught rhythm. "Boxted Tower, Red 1 ready for takeoff," he said into his mic. "Red flight cleared. Winds calm. Godspeed." Jack eased the throttle forward. The P-47 rolled heavily down the runway, its tail lifting as speed built. The vibration deepened into a low, thrilling hum as the aircraft broke free of the earth. Beneath him, the airfield fell away, a patchwork of tents, fuel trucks, and figures growing smaller with every second. He climbed through layers of haze, forming up with 3 other Thunderbolts, red flight, for specks against the pale English sky. The countryside stretched out below in soft greens and browns, a quilt of hedgerows and villages. Ahead, the faint shimmer of the channel glowed under the rising sun. Red 1 to flight, form echelon left. Climb to 15,000. Static crackled. "Copy that, Hawk." They turned east, engines thundering in harmony. To the men below, the formation looked like a slow, heavy thing, lumbering compared to the sleek Spitfires that once filled these skies. But inside the cockpit, Jack felt the raw power of the Double Wasp pushing at his spine. The altimeter climbed steadily. Clouds parted, revealing the endless expanse of the channel, flat, silver, and deceptively calm. Somewhere beyond that horizon, German pilots laughed about the milk cow. Jack adjusted the trim and tapped the reflector gun sight with his gloved knuckle. The glass was smudged with fingerprints, a reminder of the many hands that kept him alive. He thought of those men, the mechanics with blackened faces, the armorers who never flew but bore the same risks. Each mission began with their sweat. "Keep your eyes open," he said over the intercom. "If they're out there, we'll find them." Far below, the sunlight broke through a slit in the clouds, casting the surface of the sea into molten gold. The moment was so calm, so still, it felt almost holy. Then the radio crackled again. A different voice, tense. "Control to all red elements, enemy aircraft sighted near Le Havre. Multiple contacts, heading northwest, altitude 15,000. Jack's hand tightened on the stick. "Roger, control. Red flight proceeding." He looked out across the wings, broad, solid, bristling with firepower, and felt a quiet surge of confidence. "They say she's too big to fight," he murmured under his breath. "Let's show them what big can do." The formation banked southeast, diving into the sunlight. The Thunderbolt vibrated with restrained fury, its propeller biting harder into the wind. The sound in Jack's ears changed, from the steady drone of flight to the rising growl of something alive and hungry. The clouds ahead began to glow white, then gold. Jack's gloved hand slid the safety cover off the gun switch. He wasn't thinking about Kansas anymore, nor Betsy, nor the fields of home. Only the promise that had been echoing in his chest since dawn. By dusk, those laughs would end. Before England, Jack McCallister had been a farm boy from Kansas. He grew up beneath skies as wide as oceans, where the wind carried the smell of wheat and hot metal, and the land stretched farther than a man could dream. His father owned a John Deere Model A, 1939, its green paint faded and dull from the dust storms that rolled through every summer. Jack learned more about engines than schoolbooks: how to coax a stubborn carburetor to life, how to listen for the faint rattle that meant a bearing was going bad. He could tear a machine apart and rebuild it before he was 16. When the war came, it felt like the sky was calling him. Posters showed Spitfires darting through clouds, P-38s gleaming like silver arrows. Jack imagined himself there, fast, graceful, invincible. So when his draft notice came and flight school followed, he expected a stallion. Instead, when he first saw the Thunderbolt sitting on the tarmac at Bradley Field, he found a bull. The thing was enormous, all engine and armor. Its propeller was taller than he was, its fuselage as thick as a barn beam. Jack had stared at it in disbelief. "You expect me to fly that?" he'd asked his instructor. The man had only grinned. "If it doesn't kill you first, Lieutenant, it'll make you a pilot." Training in Florida was merciless. The heat was suffocating, the cockpit stank of fuel and sweat, and the P-47 punished every mistake. Jack remembered his first takeoff. The moment the wheels left the ground, the torque from that massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine nearly spun him sideways. His instructor's voice screamed in his headset, "Counter with rudder. Don't fight her, feel her." By the third week, half the class had washed out. But Jack didn't quit. He learned her quirks, how to balance her weight in the climb, how to use her dive speed instead of fearing it. When the others cursed her bulk, Jack started to admire her toughness. She was heavy, yes, but she was honest. If you treated her right, she would never betray you. He saw it during live gunnery practice. The Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning M2s, 4 in each wing, and when they fired, the plane didn't just shake, it roared like Judgment Day. The tracers carved orange streaks across the sky, punching holes clean through the target banners. The instructor, a grizzled captain from the Pacific, had shouted over the radio, "That's your insurance policy, boys. 8 reasons the Germans are going to wish you'd stayed in Kansas." By late 1943, Jack was shipped overseas to England, assigned to the 56th TH Fighter Group, 61st Squadron, Zemke's Wolfpack. Their commander, Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, was already a legend. A man of quiet authority and sharp eyes, he'd flown against the Luftwaffe long enough to respect their skill but not their arrogance. Zemke's rule was simple: you bring your boys home. You don't chase kills, you protect the bombers. Jack had never forgotten that line. In a war obsessed with numbers, Zemke talked about survival, about bringing the crew of AB-17 Flying Fortress home in one piece. By May 1944, the missions were coming fast. The group was flying escort for B-17S and B-24 Liberators over occupied France, clearing the skies before the invasion that everyone whispered about but no one dared name, Operation Overlord. The maps pinned up in the briefing tent were smeared with fingerprints and coffee stains, showing the same enemy bases again and again: Caen, Rouen, Reims, Amiens. Each red circle meant another nest of FW-198GS and BF-109GS, sleek German killers that dove like hawks. The Luftwaffe still held France's heartland, defending every bridge and rail line the Allies bombed. Jack had seen their handiwork up close: crippled bombers limping home, gunners missing, cockpits blackened by fire. Yet even then, the Germans found time to mock. Sometimes their fighters dropped propaganda leaflets over Allied lines, crude cartoons of Thunderbolts with cow udders dangling beneath their bellies, American pilots pouring milk instead of bullets. He'd kept one, folded it neatly and tucked it inside his flight jacket. Not as an insult, as a reminder. That morning, in the dim light of the officer's tent, Jack sat with a mug of black coffee gone lukewarm. Outside, the steady thrum of engines rolled across the airfield as another squadron took off. The ground shook faintly under his boots. Beside him, Lieutenant Freddie Cobb, his wingman and closest friend, leaned back in his chair, whistling through his teeth. Freddie was from Georgia, cocky, loud, and impossible not to like. Big targets, sure, Freddie said, nodding toward the airfield where a line of Thunderbolts waited in the drizzle. But hell, Jack, when those .50s open up, even a 109 turns into confetti. Jack smirked over his mug. They'll learn that soon enough. He pulled the leaflet from his jacket and set it on the table, the cartoon cow plane with its silly grin. Freddie laughed when he saw it. Keep that as a trophy, Freddie said. Jack shook his head. As a promise. Later that afternoon, when the sky finally cleared, Jack sat alone at his cot with pen and paper. Letters were his only tether to home, to the dusty fields and the quiet rhythm of Kansas. He wrote to his younger brother, Billy, who was still too young to enlist. They call this ship fat, but she climbs like a mule and hits like a thunderstorm. Tell Dad she's louder than the combine at harvest. If you could see her up close, you'd know, she's not a beauty, but she's built to take a punch. He paused, staring at the page, hearing distant thunder that wasn't weather but engines. Then he folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it with his thumb. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly on the canvas roof. Jack leaned back on his bunk and closed his eyes, unaware that the next morning's mission, the one over Rouen, would be the truest test of everything he'd just written. He would find out, in the cruelest way imaginable, what kind of storm his Thunderbolt could really summon. May 6, 1944, Operation Point Blank, mission to Rouen rail yards. The morning began calm, the kind of deceptive quiet that came before a storm. The sun hung pale over the English coast, throwing a thin light across the rippling channel below. From the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt, Lieutenant Jack McCallister could see the silver formation of B-24 Liberators stretched out ahead, broad-winged giants gleaming like coins in the high morning light. Their contrails crossed and tangled like chalk lines on blue glass. Asterisk asterisk red flight, keep tight, asterisk asterisk, the radio crackled with Colonel Zemke's calm authority. Asterisk asterisk bandits reported, 12 plus, inbound from the east. Stay sharp, asterisk asterisk. Jack adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the sky. The air was clear enough to see forever, but that only made the waiting worse. Every patch of sunlight, every speck in the distance could be death. Then he saw them, faint dots at 2 o'clock, closing fast. They grew larger by the heartbeat until the shapes were unmistakable. Focke-Wulf 190s, shark-nosed, blunt-winged, coming head-on. The sunlight flashed off their canopies like knives. Asterisk asterisk brake left, asterisk asterisk, Jack barked. He yanked the control stick, feeling the G-force slam him sideways. The Thunderbolt groaned but answered faithfully, its huge frame carving through the air. Tracers streaked past his canopy, green lines of fire snapping just inches from his wingtip. 190 overshot, too eager on the dive. Jack rolled hard, swung the nose up, and caught him in the gun sight. He squeezed the trigger. 8 Browning M2s erupted in unison, a violent chorus of flame and thunder. The recoil shook the entire aircraft. A river of brass casings poured from the wings. Jack watched the German fighter take the hits. The engine burst in smoke, the fuselage twisted, and a moment later, it was gone, spinning into the cloud deck below in a trail of black fire. Splash 1. Came Freddie Cobb's voice through the static, elated. But there was no time to celebrate. Another wave of 190s sliced through the bomber stream, cannon shells flashing bright against the silver bellies of the liberators. One B-24 rolled out of formation, one engine on fire. Its crew bailed out, tiny black dots tumbling into empty sky. Jesus, Jack muttered, and pushed the throttle forward. The Thunderbolt roared, diving after 2 enemy fighters that were making another pass. The airspeed climbed past 420 miles per hour. The altimeter spun down. His body pressed hard into the seat, chest tight, breath thin. The heavy frame of the P-47 vibrated, but she held together. "Hang on, girl," he whispered. The Germans below never saw him coming. The lead 190 began to pull up from its attack, too slow. Jack lined him up and fired a short burst. The .50 caliber rounds slammed through the fuselage, shredding metal, and in an instant the enemy aircraft came apart, the tail shearing clean away, the rest tumbling end over end toward the waves. Freddie's voice again, "You got him. You damn sure got him." The second 190 pulled into a steep climb, trying to escape. Jack followed, throttling up, feeling the Thunderbolt strain as the massive ART 2800 double Wasp engine clawed for air. The climb was brutal, the GS forcing his vision to gray. But where the lighter German fighter would overheat, the Thunderbolt simply powered on. Jack's gunsight found the 190's tail again. Another burst, 3 seconds. Debris. The canopy flew off and the German bailed, his chute blossoming white against the blue. The radio exploded with overlapping voices, reports, shouts, warnings. The sky was chaos now, tracer lines crossing like threads of fire. Jack could smell cordite and hot oil, feel the tremor of his guns through his hands. Below, the liberators droned steadily toward the French coast, their bomb bay doors opening. Dark shapes tumbled out, the payload meant for the Rouen rail yards, one of the arteries feeding the German front. Explosions flared faintly far below, like matches striking across the land. Then silence. For a few seconds, only the sound of engines, American and German alike, filled the sky. Red flight, regroup. Report fuel and ammo. Zemke's voice again, calm as ever. Jack glanced at his gauges. His ammunition counters showed nearly half empty. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the cockpit. He took a long breath and looked around. Freddie's Thunderbolt slid back into formation off his right wing, smoke streaking faintly from its gun ports. 2 confirmed, Freddie said, his voice still shaking from adrenaline. "You." Jack wiped his forehead. "1 for sure, maybe 2. Doesn't matter. We held them off." They circled above the coast, watching as the last German fighters turned away, diving eastward toward Rouen. The bombers were already homebound, their silhouettes shrinking in the sun. Jack exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his body. "They're learning," he said over the radio. "They don't dive on us like they used to." "Maybe they've heard the stories," Freddie replied. "The ones about the fat lady with the iron fists." Jack chuckled under his breath, adjusting the trim as they turned for home. The joke wasn't far off. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't elegant. It was a weapon built like a tank, an aircraft that could dive faster than anything the Luftwaffe fielded and crawl back home full of holes. By the time Red Flight crossed the English coast, the adrenaline had turned to exhaustion. The channel glittered below like hammered steel, peaceful again as if nothing had happened. Jack throttled back, letting the roar ease to a steady hum. Boxted Tower, Red 1 returning. "For aircraft, no losses," he said into his mic. The reply came almost instantly. "Welcome home, Red Flight." The landing was smooth but heavy. The Thunderbolt thumped onto the runway, tires squealing, parachute of dust rising behind. Jack taxied back to the dispersal area, canopy open, the cool English air rushing in to replace the stifling heat of the cockpit. When he shut down the engine, the sudden silence was deafening. He climbed down the ladder, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. His hands were trembling. His flight suit smelled of sweat, fuel, and cordy. Freddie came jogging up, helmet under his arm, grinning like a boy. 6 in total, Freddie said breathlessly. Red Flight didn't lose a man. Jack nodded, too tired to smile. Around them, ground crews were already swarming the planes, checking bullet holes, reloading belts, refueling tanks. The war never rested. A Stars and Stripes correspondent hurried over, notepad in hand. "Lieutenant, how does it feel out there? The Germans call your Thunderbolt a flying milk cow. Care to comment?" Jack looked past the man toward his aircraft. The fuselage was streaked with oil, the paint around the gun ports blackened from heat. Smoke still curled faintly from the barrels. He wiped his gloves on his knees, took a breath, and said quietly, "They called her fat. But she bit back." The reporter scribbled, smiling, but Jack was already walking away. He stopped once, turned back to look at the big fighter sitting proud in the mud and sunlight. The ground crews worked beneath her wings like surgeons. For a long moment he simply watched. The wind moved through the tall grass along the runway, carrying the faint scent of cordite and sea salt. Above, the sky was empty again, vast, quiet, indifferent. Tomorrow there would be another mission. But for tonight, the laughter across the channel had gone silent. 2 weeks later, the squadron rested. The adrenaline of victory had faded, leaving only exhaustion and silence. Rain hammered the tin roofs of the hangars, steady and relentless. Puddles pooled in the ruts between the dispersal huts, reflecting the silhouettes of the parked Thunderbolts, their wings slick and shining under the gray English sky. The air smelled of fuel, oil, and wet earth, the perfume of every airfield at war. Inside the small radio hut, Lieutenant Jack McCallister sat slouched in a wooden chair, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. The stove in the corner hissed weakly, unable to fight the damp chill that crept through the walls. On the table before him, a battered Hallicrafter's SX-28 shortwave receiver crackled with static. He turned the dial slowly, hunting through ghostly frequencies. Most channels were dead, just static and faint Morse code. Then, through the noise, a man's voice broke through, speaking in German. The accent was clipped and sure of itself. Even without understanding every word, Jack recognized the tone, arrogance, pride. The voice belonged to a Luftwaffe pilot boasting about his latest victory. "Another Americanish coup down today," the man laughed. "Those flying milk cows fall easy when they meet real fighters." Jack felt his jaw tighten. He didn't need a translation. The insult was familiar. He was about to switch the dial when something unexpected followed. The broadcast cut to music, a woman's voice, soft and trembling, floating through the static like smoke. The melody was simple, haunting. Underneath the lantern by the Barak gate, "Darling, I remember the way you used to wait." Jack froze. Lily Marlene. He'd heard it before, over Sicily, over Salerno, over every front where men went to die. It was the song of soldiers staring at the stars and wondering if they'd ever see home again. Every pilot knew it, German, British, American. He sat motionless, listening. The rain softened outside. The voice on the radio seemed impossibly far away, yet heartbreakingly close. Across the room, a man looked up from his workbench, the German POW mechanic, assigned to help maintain the captured aircraft and engines at Boxted. His name was Hans Keller, once a mechanic for Jägerschwader 26 Schlagiter, one of the Luftwaffe's finest fighter wings. His blonde hair was cropped short, his uniform replaced by plain gray overalls marked with a small red PW on the chest. Hans had been at Boxted for a month, quiet and disciplined. He worked hard, spoke little, and never complained. The other men mostly ignored him, some out of hatred, others out of awkward pity. But tonight, as Lily Marlene filled the room, Jack caught his eye. For a long moment, neither spoke. The song played on, the woman's voice trembling with a sadness that needed no translation. Jack finally broke the silence. "Was she your song too?" Hans hesitated, then nodded. His English was careful, accented but clear. "For all of us," he said quietly. "We thought we were winning then." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jack looked down at the coffee mug in his hand. It was chipped, stained, and still half full. He pushed it across the table. "Here," he said. "It's awful, but it's warm." Hans blinked in surprise, then gave a small, tired smile. "Danke," he said, wrapping his hands around the cup. The steam rose faintly between them. Outside, through the open doorway, the sound of an engine coughed to life. One of the maintenance crews was running a Thunderbolt for inspection, its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 growling like distant thunder. The sound filled the hut, drowning out the rain for a moment. Both men paused to listen, a sound they knew too well. Hans set the mug down and said softly, "That sound, every time I hear it, my stomach tightens. We used to fear those engines. We could always tell when they were coming. First the hum, then the scream, then the tracers." Jack nodded. "And we used to fear yours." Hans looked up. "The 190? "Yeah," Jack said, leaning back. "You could dive faster, climb faster, at least until we learned to fight on our terms. I lost good men to that bird of yours." Hans gave a slow nod, his eyes distant. "And I lost good men to yours." The song ended. The radio returned to static, filling the silence between them. For a while, they just sat there, two soldiers who should have hated each other, listening to the rain and the low growl of engines in the distance. The war outside the hut felt far away, as if the world had paused to let them breathe. Finally, Jack said quietly, "Do you ever think about them? The pilots you fixed planes for?" Hans took a long time to answer. "Every day," he said. "Some I helped into their cockpits, watched them take off, and never saw them again. After a while, you stop cheering when they go. You just hope they come back." Jack stared at the radio, the static whispering softly. "We're the same then," he said. "We just wore different wings." Hans gave a weary smile. "In the sky, there is no uniform," he said. "Only fear. And hope." Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle. The engine test ended with a sputter, and the airfield fell quiet again. From somewhere near the barracks came the faint sound of laughter, not cruel, just tired. The war went on, but tonight, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Jack poured another cup of the bitter coffee and slid it across again. Hans accepted it without a word. For the first time since they'd met, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Jack thought of all the propaganda he'd heard, the voices that called his plane a cow, that mocked his country's machines. It all felt childish now, hollow. Sitting across from Hans, he realized the truth the skies had been trying to teach them all along. Up there, it didn't matter who painted crosses or stars on their wings. It didn't matter whose anthem played or whose flag waved. When the canopy closed, every man breathed the same thin air. Every man's blood was the same color when it spilled into the clouds. The rain picked up again, tapping gently on the roof. Hans looked out the window toward the parked Thunderbolts. "She's a good plane," he said finally. "Strong. I can see why you love her." Jack nodded, following his gaze. "And yours were beautiful. Deadly." Hans smiled faintly. "Not enough." Jack didn't answer. He reached forward and turned the radio knob again, searching for the frequency that had carried the song. But the channel was gone, swallowed back into static. He leaned back, closing his eyes, the faint hum of the field settling around him like a blanket. Two men, enemies by uniform, sat in silence. Outside, the engines of war waited in the rain. And somewhere in the distance, across the sea, another pilot, German or American, might have been listening to the same song, wondering if the voice on the other side of the static was thinking of him too. In that moment, Jack understood. The laughter, the boasting, the taunts, all of it was just noise. Up there, in the cold and the wind and the sky that took men from both sides, they were all the same. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Before dawn, RAF Boxted was already awake. The airfield pulsed with quiet purpose, engines warming under tarps, ground crews moving in hurried silence, the faint rumble of distant artillery rolling across the channel like a warning from another world. The low clouds hung heavy, their underbellies glowing faintly with reflected light from hundreds of search beams across southern England. Lieutenant Jack McCallister stood beside his Thunderbolt, helmet in hand, his breath fogging in the cold air. Around him, the rest of the 56th fighter group prepared to launch. Mechanics loaded fresh ammunition into the wing bays, .50 caliber Browning rounds, 425 per gun. The belts rattled through the feed trays like the ticking of a clock. Today wasn't just another mission. Everyone knew it. For weeks, the rumors had circulated, something big was coming. And now it was here. The invasion had begun. Operation Overlord. Jack climbed into the cockpit of Betsy's Thunder, strapping himself in tight. He flicked on the magnetos, felt the engine cough, sputter, and then explode into a deep, throaty roar. The propeller blurred, blowing a spray of water off the ground crew's slickers. One of them, a young corporal from Texas, gave a thumbs up as he ducked away. "Box Ted Tower, Red 1 ready for departure," Jack called. "Copy, Red 1. Good hunting. Bring her home." He throttled forward, and the aircraft surged ahead, shaking off the earth like a living thing. One after another, the Thunderbolts lifted into the gray dawn, a formation of armored beasts rising to guard the greatest gamble in modern history. They broke through the cloud layer at 6,000 feet, the early sun splitting the horizon. Below them stretched the English Channel, but not the quiet, silver ribbon it had always been. Now it was alive. An armada. Thousands of ships. From landing craft to destroyers, from transports to massive battleships. A living, moving continent of steel. The sea itself seemed to breathe smoke. Waves crashed against metal hulls, and in the dim morning light, gunfire flickered like heat lightning along the French coast. Jack had never seen anything so vast, so human, and yet so small against the immensity of war. "Red Flight, form up. Sweep ahead of Sword Beach," Zemke's voice ordered over the radio. "Watch for flak, and God help you if you fly below 2,000. They crossed the coast near Wistrium, the smell of cordite even reaching the cockpit vents. Below, ships opened fire on German defenses, flashes of orange in the gray surf. Landing craft crawled toward the sand, soldiers crouched within, helmets gleaming like fish scales. Jack's radio crackled again. "Contact, 11 o'clock, low altitude, possible FW 190s. "Copy," Jack replied, eyes narrowing. He pushed the throttle forward, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 roaring in answer. His Thunderbolt surged ahead through thin flak bursts, black clouds blooming all around. The sky was alive with fire, tracers, puffs of smoke, the brief glint of sunlight on spinning shrapnel. Then he saw them, 3 Focke-Wulf 190s climbing through the chaos, desperate, reckless. Jack banked hard. "Red Flight with me." The Germans made their pass on a group of P-51 Mustangs, but they never stood a chance. The American fighters swarmed like hornets. Jack rolled in behind one of the enemy planes and fired a 2-second burst. The .50s thundered, the German fighter shuddered under the impacts, wings folding as it dropped like a stone. "Splash 1, Freddie Cobb shouted. "They're scattering." The others fled south, diving through the flak and disappearing into the smoke. By mid-morning, the skies over Normandy belonged to the Allies. Bombers moved in steady streams overhead, strafing German positions. Paratroopers drifted down like falling snow. Below, the beaches were fire and thunder, explosions blooming across the sand, men running, crawling, dying, advancing. Jack circled high above it all, a silent witness to history. He could see St. Laurent, Colleville, names that would soon be carved into every headline in the world. For a brief moment, he let go of the stick and just looked. Down there, the world was burning. But up here, for the first time, the sky was theirs. By noon, the Luftwaffe had vanished. A few scattered sorties, but no real fight left in them. Their fuel, their will, both gone. Jack and the others turned back toward England, crossing the channel under a sun that now shone clean and bright through the thinning clouds. Behind them, smoke curled from the beaches like the breath of a giant. He touched the edge of the photo taped beside his gun sight, Betsy, smiling back at him from Kansas. "We did it," he murmured. Back at Boxted that evening, the airfield felt strangely calm. The crews worked silently, the weight of the day still sinking in. Jack climbed down from his plane, his legs weak from the long hours. His face was streaked with sweat and grime. Freddie was already waiting by the dispersal hut, grinning, exhausted. "They never even touched us," Freddie said, handing him a canteen. Jack drank deeply, then nodded. "Not today." The war wasn't over, everyone knew that. But something had changed. For the first time, victory didn't feel like a distant rumor. It felt real. That night, in the glow of a single lantern, Jack pulled out his notebook and wrote a letter home. They said this plane was too big to fight. Today she proved big means strong. I saw her take flak that would have split a Spitfire in two. She kept flying. She brought me home. He paused, then added a quick sketch. A Thunderbolt soaring over France, its 8 guns blazing, tracers arching down through the clouds like streaks of light from heaven. He signed his name at the bottom, folded the paper carefully, and slipped it into an envelope marked for Topeka, Kansas. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night was clear. From the far end of the airfield came the muffled laughter of mechanics drinking from tin cups, their voices blending with the distant hum of another squadron returning late from patrol. Jack stepped outside and looked up. The stars were faint, but they were there, small and stubborn, shining over a world at war. Tomorrow, they'd fly again. But for this one night, the sky was theirs, and the Thunderbolt, the so-called flying barrel, had proved what she truly was. Not a joke. Not a cow. A shield. And for men like Jack, that meant everything. Autumn 1945, Kansas. The war was over. The news had come months ago, but the silence that followed felt stranger than the gunfire ever had. The fields were golden again, wind moving through the wheat like an ocean tide. The air smelled of soil and rain, of diesel and earth, not oil and cordy. The skies above were empty, no contrails, no engines, just the quiet hum of a peaceful world. Lieutenant Jack McCallister, no longer lieutenant to anyone but the memories that followed him, worked the land beside his father. The same John Deere tractor he'd written about in his letters still sputtered faithfully, though its paint had faded to a dull, sun-beaten green. Jack's hands, once wrapped around a flight stick at 30,000 feet, now gripped the rough wheel of the tractor, steadying its path across the soft Kansas dirt. Sometimes, when the wind caught just right, he could almost hear the low growl of a Pratt & Whitney R-2800 in the distance, a phantom echo that faded before he could look up. The town hadn't changed much. Same brick storefronts, same grain elevator, same faces at the diner. People smiled when they saw him, clapped him on the back, said words like hero and asterisk, welcome home. Asterisk he nodded politely, grateful but distant. Most of them would never understand. How could they? They hadn't seen the sky lit with tracer fire or watched men fall from burning aircraft. They hadn't smelled the cold metal tang of an oxygen mask while counting down miles to the coast. He slept lighter now. The sound of thunder still woke him, not because of fear, but because it always pulled him back to that other sound, the roar of 8 Brownings opening up in unison. One gray afternoon, while he was oiling the plow, his father stepped out from the farmhouse holding a brown parcel. "From England," he said, handing it over. The handwriting was neat, foreign, the paper worn from travel. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and broke the seal carefully. Inside was a single envelope and something wrapped in thin tissue paper. The envelope contained a letter written in a precise, almost architectural hand. "Lieutenant McCallister, you may not remember me, but I remember your kindness. I was repatriated in March. I fly no more. I repair farm engines now near Hamburg. I thought you might like this. A photo I took of your squadron that day over the channel. The Thunderbolts looked like giants among clouds. Hans Keller." Jack paused, his chest tightening as the name settled into his memory. The German mechanic. The POW who had shared his coffee on a rainy night at Boxted. He unfolded the tissue paper and found the photograph, a black and white print, crisp and beautiful despite the creases. 4 P-47 Thunderbolts in formation, climbing through scattered clouds. Sunlight gleamed off their wings like halos. Beneath them, smaller shapes, Focke-Wulfs, turned and twisted, breaking apart in the distance. Jack studied it for a long time. He could almost feel the vibration of the engine again, the smell of cordite, the pull of the sky. On the back of the photo, written in careful German script, were 3 words. Respect dem Donner. Respect the thunder. He smiled faintly. That night, after supper, he took the photograph to the barn and pinned it to the wall above his workbench. For a while, he just stood there, listening to the ticking of the cooling tractor engine. The lantern light flickered across the image, making it almost seem alive. The thunderbolts frozen in time, forever climbing toward a sun that would never set. He thought of the men who hadn't come home. Freddie Cobb, shot down over France in late June. Colonel Zemke, captured when his parachute drifted into German lines that autumn. Heroes, all of them, but now just names carved into the base of a monument somewhere far away. War had a way of compressing years into moments. 1 second of decision could outlive a lifetime. Jack had learned that lesson in the roar of engines and the whisper of falling ash. Sometimes he still wondered about Hans, whether his workshop near Hamburg smelled of oil and wheat the way Kansas did, whether he still thought of that song on the radio, Lily Marlene. The war had scattered them like leaves in opposite winds, but somehow, in the end, they had both come home to machines and silence. A week later, Jack drove into town to the post office. He bought a stack of new envelopes and a roll of stamps. That night he wrote back, Hans, I do remember you. I never forgot that night in the rain, or the song. I'm back on the farm now. The skies here are quiet, but sometimes when thunder rolls, I still hear the engines. The photo means more than I can say. I keep it where I can see it every day. If you ever hear that song again, think of the men who flew it, all of them. Jack McCallister. He sealed the letter and dropped it at the depot the next morning. Winter came early that year. The wheat fields turned pale under frost, and the wind carried the scent of snow. Jack worked until sundown most days, his dog trotting alongside the tractor. Every evening he'd stop by the barn, touch the edge of the photograph, and whisper something no one else would ever hear. He didn't talk much about the war after that. People asked, of course, wanted stories, wanted to know what it felt like. He'd just smile and say, loud, and leave it at that. But sometimes, when a thunderstorm rolled over the plains and the sky split with light, he'd stand on the porch and watch the rain fall sideways. The wind would carry that deep, distant rumble, not unlike the sound of a radial engine at full throttle, and for a heartbeat, he'd be back there again. The clouds were smoke, the flashes were flak, and he was 23, climbing through chaos with the world depending on him. Then the sound would fade and he'd be home again. Wheat, rain, He never saw Hans again, but the letter came back once, a reply, months later. The song still plays here. The same voice, the same words. I think it means something different now. Perhaps respect, for the sky, for the thunder, and for those who faced it. Your friend, Hans. Jack folded the letter and tucked it behind the photograph. Together they became a small shrine, to war, to friendship, to the strange humanity that sometimes rises even from the ashes of destruction. Years later, when his children asked about the picture, he'd simply say, "That's the plane that brought me home." And when storms rolled over Kansas, he'd watch the lightning and listen. Each rumble seemed to whisper the same message that Hans had written all those years ago, the one truth every pilot learned too late. Respect the thunder. Because in every war, laughter comes first, before understanding. And sooner or later, even the proudest enemy learns the truth of the iron bird that carried a man through hell and safely home.